So just to say thank you again to Georg, to Isabel and to Noelia, who've been pivotal in terms of organising both today's seminar as well as my visiting fellowship here at the Open University of Catalonia. Today's presentation emerges from a three-year project that I did in collaboration with the ESRC, who are a non-governmental funding body in the UK, and the ACCA, who disseminate and produce exams for accountants and financiers. And it was a collaboration to look at the careers and experiences of women and men in finance and accounting in the UK. And this is really the first academic article that has emerged from the thesis, and is currently well into the revise and resubmit stage at a journal. So I hope its focus on gender and some of the broader issues will be helpful and interesting for those who are doing work on gender, particularly in the Gender and ICT Institute here at the Open University. For those who don't really know me, my name is Darren Thomas Baker, and I did my previous project at King's College London. I'm also a visiting fellow at Cranfield Management School. So just to make a start, so today's presentation I'm going to talk about the lived experiences of women in finance and accounting using a particularly psychoanalytically informed perspective. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about two key psychosocial dynamics that I identified in the research. The first dynamic is what I term perseverance, and it refers to how women recognise how the workplace is stacked against them, but how they must push through in order to be successful in the profession. And the second dynamic is when one is unable to overcome these barriers in the workplace, and they only have themselves to blame, which individualises responsibility for success in the workplace. And I show how this is achieved through splitting, which represents how negative experiences in the workplace are ignored or are blamed on those who are unable to realise their individual success and agency in the sector. To just give a bit of context in terms of the current literature, there is a bit of research, obviously, that looks at the significant underrepresentation of women in the profession, particularly at senior roles, with around 18% of senior level roles in finance being occupied by women, and in big four organisations, the big accounting firms in the UK, around 15% of women occupy partner level occupations. However, what these studies often neglect is how women make sense of their experiences, and more importantly, how these experiences are shaped by neoliberalism. Obviously, neoliberalism is a very multifaceted term, but I'm using it in this context specifically around how ideas around individualism and agency shape subjectivities, how they shape gender at work. And these ideas really emerge from the works of Giddens, etc., who talk about how the contemporary context liberates individuals from the constraints of surrounding structures, social and cultural structures. There has been a burgeoning area of research exploring the connections between gender and neoliberalism, particularly through a post-feminist agenda or view in media studies. Post-feminism in this sense refers to the analytical tool used to understand how gender is contoured in the workplace and how inequality emerges. Scholars in organisational and business studies have started to employ some of these ideas, particularly exploring ideas around the psychic life of neoliberal women or ideas around entrepreneurialism and subjectivity in contemporary organisations. And much of this work takes a Foucauldian view. However, there has been little engagement around the psychic life of women through a Butlerian Judith Butler perspective, as well as Melanie Klein perspective. And so I was particularly compelled by using a psychoanalytical view as a way to really try and understand at a deeper level how neoliberalism comes to occupy and shape subjects within the workplace. Just in terms of the conceptual framework, so as I mentioned, I drew on ideas of Melanie Klein, particularly the ideas of splitting, blaming and idealization. In terms of a sort of quick explanation for those who are unfamiliar with these ideas, splitting occurs when individuals want to defend themselves against anxiety, in which objects are split between good and bad parts. The bad object, as Melanie Klein describes it, is projected outwards and felt as persecution, whilst the good object is idealized and introjected as a way to defend it against those that threaten that idealization. This enables subjects to distort reality and remain detached from circumstances in which they experience anxiety. Blame accompanies splitting and enables the individual to continue on the splitting and idealizing. Reality is distorted as certain individuals or groups are deemed to challenge or are seen as responsible for one's difficulties or challenges in the workplace. Judith Butler draws on the ideas by Melanie Klein and agrees with much of what she says, particularly around how persecution or denial of vulnerability and persecution can lead to the continuation of injuriability as well as blaming. However, what Butler offers is a more discursive understanding of this, and she understands these psychodynamics as impacted by existing discursive frames that precede and exceed the self, which raises important questions regarding how neoliberal broader discourses are taken in and shape subjectivities in the workplace. In terms of the methods that I used in the research, obviously with this post-structuralist psychoanalytical framework in mind, I designed an approach that would enable myself to understand both how discourses shape the senses of self in the workplace, but also how these discourses are internalized and externalized. And to do this, I designed an eclectic approach or mix of approaches, which involved firstly identifying shared senses of self, shared discourses that reflect the lived day-to-day experiences of women in the workplace, particularly using the discursive interpretive repertoire tool. Secondly, this involved shifting back or tapering in to understand the individual shapes of accounts given by individuals, and trying to identify and decipher particular psychodynamics within those individual accounts. And then again, trying to connect all these three things together, connecting these individual psychodynamics as well as these shared senses of self back to broader neoliberal discourses as a way to show that the movement of discourses through subjects at work. To support this particular approach, this eclectic approach, I drew on psychosocial methods, particularly the free association method as espoused by Wendy Holloway and Jefferson, which helps scholars identify unconscious pathways and emotions that are embedded within talk, rather than just perhaps identifying simple discursive structures as indicative of experience. In terms of the analysis, I took a three-level approach. This involved a surface analysis initially, looking back at the transcripts. Sorry, just hold this actually. This involved, going back to the transcripts, trying to understand, analyse, and the key interpretive repertoires that indicated the senses of self and experience in the workplace. We then employed a subtextual analysis, which meant going back and trying to understand associations that are made in the accounts, particularly in relation to others, and the effective tenor of those accounts. And this was really where we started to try and identify some of these psychodynamics in the talk, particularly around projection, which I'll talk about shortly. The harmonics of the accounts given really orientated around our own experience of conducting interviews, particularly drawing on the work of Wilfred Bion and Reverie, trying to understand how affinities and relationships were constructed dynamically and interrelationally between myself and the participants, and how that perhaps was indicative of the other and their experiences of the workplace. So in terms of the first dynamic that I identified, this involved what I called perseverance. And this was really a defensive mechanism that related to women's idea around addressing or moving through forms of adversity in the workplace. Many of the accounts given by women in the workplace did touch, surprisingly, on challenging moments during their careers, which had adversely impacted their progression. So these represented, moments in which women had failed to make promotion, perhaps they hadn't received promotion, pay increases or bonuses, or the same opportunities, perhaps, as their male colleagues. However, although the women recognised these challenges, they did not describe them or define them as gender discrimination. Instead, they spoke passionately about how they single-handedly fought for the same opportunities as their male counterparts. These accounts fell into broader neoliberal individualistic discourses in which challenges were faced alone rather than collectively with others, which detracted from the gendered nature of these experiences. In this section, I want to give you some examples of the accounts given by women, by executive and non-executive women in finance and accounting. And these reflect moments where perhaps their relations with others have broken down, attachments with others have broken down, or perhaps they're effective embodiments of these experiences. So this first extract is by Sharon, who is an executive in her 50s in a mid-tier accounting firm. And she gave an account of the importance of mentoring and coaching to her success. I'll just give you a minute or so just to sort of peruse that extract, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So, as you can see from the extract, Sharon talks much about coaching and support that she received as a way to make promotion to partner level in her organisation, and she describes, particularly early on in the interview, her frustration at the lack of or slow progress that she has made over many years, despite, as she explains, working hard, doing a good job and generating good fees or profit for the organisation. And she begins this particular account with an explanation of a really bad working relationship, as she puts it, with a male superior at work, who she constructs as unsupportive and egocentric. And she found this relationship so frustrating that she changed roles. However, in the account, it shifts, and instead Sharon begins explaining how she was not cognizant or aware of how during this time she could add value, stand out in her role in order to make partner level or executive level in her organisation. And from a cleaning perspective, Sharon splits off the distressing relationship that she had with her partner by individualising her challenges to career progression. Sharon draws on neoliberal discourses such as adding value, confidence, standing out in order to rationalise her experiences in the workplace, which indirectly defends ideals of work as meritocratic, which is an important trope in neoliberalism. In this next extract, Lauren is an executive in her mid-40s in a global investment bank, and she spoke fondly throughout the interview of her interest in gender equality at work and the role that she plays in supporting the women's network and the reading that she has on her desk around biases, etc., which she peruses. I'll just give you a minute or so just to have a look at this extract. So in this extract, Lauren gives an account of the challenges that she faced in an established project that she joined in India with her organisation. In the extract, Lauren explains how she was accused of not building relationships with her new male-dominated team. Despite attending the professional social events with these team members, Lauren explains how they would not talk with her or attempt to relate to her, which evoked feelings of exclusion and solitude. This extract elucidates cleaning ideas as Lauren splits off the bad or discriminatory aspects of her account and blames herself as an insular person for her apparent experiences of inequality. The splitting and the shift of blame onto the self is a defence against anxiety evoked from the discriminatory actions of others. The second important dynamic that I identified from the research was blaming. And executive women often attempted to blame less successful women for the continued underrepresentation of women at senior levels in organisations. We call the second defence mechanism blaming, as it mirrors perseverance as the good side of the splitting mechanism discussed in the previous part of the presentation. Women who do not succeed are constructed as passive victims who are not embodying the ideal of neoliberalism and are therefore to blame for their lack of success. Women used blame as a way to depersonalise female colleagues and deny the significance of individual stories, which was reinforced through the take-up of individualistic neoliberal tropes of personal choice, which again work against ideas of collectivism at work. Stella is an executive in her late 40s in a Big Four accounting firm, and she appears to blame other women for their lack of progress, particularly using these tropes of personal choice and self-agency in the workplace. Blame, according to Klein, is important in the continuation of splitting and in the shielding of aspects of the good object. Less successful women at work threaten the idealisation of organisations as fair and meritocratic, and therefore, in order to defend against this threat, projection enables senior women to blame others for their own circumstances and maintain detachment from the reality of the workplace. From a Kleinian perspective, they reflect a depersonalisation of others and denial of the significance of the individual, and in turn reinforced through individualistic neoliberal tropes. Stella suggests that women who are less successful are not making the right decisions and choices, which denies unfair structural and cultural outcomes in organisations. Distorted ideas of limitless choices at work help to position less successful women as at fault rather than the organisation. This enables women to eliminate the individual distinctiveness of others who come to symbolise part objects rather than whole objects. I'm using again an extract from Sharon just to give you a sense of how the overall accounts moved for individuals that I interviewed. This extract again from Sharon elucidates how executive women blamed inequality on less successful women by drawing on particularly gender-neutral discourses. So this example by Sharon shows how women in accounting and finance attempt to present success and getting on in the workplace as presenting oneself as appropriately and professionally as one can. From a cleaning perspective, Sharon's story reflects a splitting off of the gendered aspects of the body and work, such as being girly girl and giggly, as she puts it, and rationalising these attributes as unprofessional and inappropriate at work. The implication of this splitting is that there is a shielding of neoliberal ideas of the workplace as fair, regardless of one's gender, providing you are professional. This enables Sharon to rationalise the instances of discrimination that she's perhaps experienced, for example, through the aggressive colleagues that she spoke much about in her account, as the characteristic of the individual rather than perhaps of gender discrimination, whilst blaming less successful and younger women for making up excuses for their mistreatment. However, Sharon fails to recognise how professionalism and the professional norm is masculine in nature, and how this norm renders other forms of attributes or ways of being or presenting oneself as abject and inappropriate in the work. Therefore, women are interpellated to perform indirect forms of masculinity through professional discourses. However, psychoanalytically speaking, splitting enables in this account to defend and take comfort in idealizations of the workplace as gender neutral through ideas of professional discourses. Just to sum up, so overall I've spoken about two fundamental psychosocial dynamics that I identified in my research. The first one concerns perseverance, where women talk about having to persevere over and overcome hindrances and obstacles within the workplace in order to be successful. And the second dynamic really identifies how in order to be successful, women have to overcome and jump these barriers, and if they don't, they have only themselves to blame for that lack of success. Through these constructions, it appears that women recognise that the workplace is stacked against them, but they simultaneously suggest that women simply have to push through these barriers that they might encounter throughout their time in the workplace. I elucidated these ideas by drawing on the idea of defensive mechanisms by Melanie Klein, particularly around splitting, blaming and idealisation. I suggest that women, when they encounter these negative experiences at work, split off the unfair treatment as a way to evade anxiety and discomfort, and to overcome and persevere these obstacles. In this second defensive position, obviously women portray less successful women as victims and blame them for their lack of success. This involves splitting off undesirable elements of organisational reality and projecting them into less successful women who are cyclically understood from male client terms as bad objects, and as a way to idealise and shield fantasies of organisations as fair and meritocratic. Women therefore sort of rationalise these as the inability of less successful women to make the right choices and overcome the hindrances put in their place. By shifting blame away as such, this enables women to continue on believing that success in organisations depends on one's hard work and personal choices. So questions? Anyone?